Hi, Tom Kofer with OnPoint Consulting. Here today to let you know that we're very excited to be sharing information about our individual recorded learning sessions from our highly successful free OnPoint Sage 300 CRE web conference that was attended by Sage 300 users from all over the country. Over a 2 day period, we had 10 great web learning sessions that were very well attended, and just wanted to pass them on to you as part of OnPoint's continuing commitment to you, our customer, and to Sage 300 CRE users. Um, the session today addresses ODBC from Microsoft Office. And for those of you that don't know, most of you do, ODBC, of course, stands for Open Database Connectivity. And just best practices and learning how to understand to increase efficiency and productivity using Excel, and a live link to your Sage 300 database and data dictionary via ODBC really makes it nice to easily pull lots of different information out of Excel or out of Sage into Excel for reporting purposes and analytics. Um, we were able to deliver this successful webinar series because of our deep pool of very experienced Sage 300 CRE consultants, trainers, software developers, report developers, and key alliances with partners that are focused on the same things that we are. And in addition to our support, training, consulting services at OnPoint, we provide our Sage customers with tools / product services called optimization and business process reviews to really help you determine if Sage can be enhanced and continue to be used, or if it should be replaced. And we're getting lots of questions these days around those topics. We've helped hundreds of Sage 300 customers just like you over the past 30 years, and we're here to help you gain the maximum use of your software and extend the life of your investment. And we're so thankful for your support. So the bottom line is we're here to help. So if you find this recorded video helpful, please like and share it on Facebook or LinkedIn. And you can also reach out to us at onpoint-software.com. Thank you. Enjoy this session with our compliments, and stay well, friends. Thank you.
Hopefully everybody could hear me okay. I have to say I've been looking forward to teaching this. This particular topic is near and dear to my heart, and I've been teaching it for quite a while. I will say up front, this is the first time I've had to do it in a webinar format, and so always up for a good challenge. Hopefully this will go as smoothly as the in-person ones normally do. So, welcome. Appreciate you taking the time with me today. I like to start out maybe the same way I normally do most of my classes. Very briefly, let me tell you a little bit about me so you know where I'm coming from. And then we're going to take a quick moment and we're going to poll you so I can find out a little bit about you and find out where you're coming from. And then we'll kind of go over very quickly the course outline, and depending upon the makeup of the people that are attending, we may adjust that just slightly. So just briefly, my name is Mike Savecki. I'm with the treasurer of Briar Hill Associates. We're in Columbus, Ohio. I'm an end user. I'm not a consultant or a certified consultant. That being said and done, I have been a Sage user for 23 years. I've been involved with various users groups for 19, and I've actually been teaching for 17 years. So while I'm not really a consultant, I've kind of been around the block. The reason that I bring up that I'm an end user is I like to think that when I do my course material, I don't try to teach theoretical things. I'm a very practical, let's get from point A to point B kind of guy. And so everything that I teach and everything that I'm going to be showing you today are things that we actually use. These are These are things that we use every day in our companies, and ODBC has been a blessing for us in that it has really allowed us to increase our efficiency, get rid of a lot of duplication, and really increase our accuracy in both our reporting and our operations. So as I'll say many times, it's a subject that's near and kind of dear to my heart. So with that being said and done, I believe we have the ability to do some polling, and I've asked Barclay and Lori if we could ask a couple questions. Let's see. I think we have a poll going here.
Hey, we've got the first question up, which is, how would you rate your knowledge of ODBC? And we'll give everybody just a few seconds to answer that, and then we'll look at the results.
I'm not sure if I can, let's see, I don't know if I could see the poll from here.
Oh, it's okay. It is showing up in on their screens. I'm not.
Okay. Well, if just want to read me the results.
I'll be happy to. I'll go ahead and give everybody just 5 more seconds to answer that, if you don't mind.
No problem.
Okay. I'm going to close that one, and we will share those results. We have 50% saying that with no experience.
Okay.
We have 40% saying some prior experience, and 10% saying advanced user.
Okay.
Okay. And then we can go ahead and launch the next question, which is, do you have experience using Microsoft Access? Give people just 20 or 30 seconds to respond there. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and close that one as well. So we've got, for Access, we've got 50% saying no experience, 33% saying some experience, and 17% are advanced users.
Okay.
And lastly, do you or your company use Event One Office Connector? Okay, I think we'll give everybody just another 5 seconds or so, and I'll close that one up. Okay, 80% no, 10% occasional, and 10% frequent.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so with 50% no experience and 40% basic users, we will spend then a little more time on the setup stuff, and not a whole lot of heavy on access, so I may just adjust that material a little. But let's jump into it. So first off, they wanted me to sort of start off everything today. Let me see. With sort of our learning objectives. Now, the official learning objective of this course is to learn how to use ODBC to link and modify Sage 300 data in Microsoft Office, which is kind of a formal, official way of saying it. I've actually rephrased it in 3 other different ways. My first one is, thou shalt never enter data more than once. This is a very, very critical thing, and it's a way of thinking with ODBC. One of the powers of ODBC is, for most of the tasks that we need, data resides already somewhere in our system. And we're going to use this as a methodology of getting that data without not only not having to retype it, but also to link it so that it refreshes. Official learning objective number 2 is work with data on your own terms. the thing that we're especially going to see with our access examples is that we can use ODBC to manipulate data in ways that is not allowed in the normal program interface. And we can also rearrange that interface so that the process is much more efficient. And that's really a really powerful thing with this. However, what I also like to say with objective number 2 is, with great power comes great responsibility. Some of the things I'm going to show you are excellent, great ways of increasing your efficiency. However, just because you can do it doesn't necessarily mean you should. And we will kind of discuss that as we go through the examples. So a quick overview of where we're going to go is we're going to start out with what I call the boring stuff. Now, I always hate this because the way to hook people on the ODBC is actually to show them what you can do with it. But before we can show you, I've got to actually teach you the underlying basic tools on what it is and how we set it up. And I call that the boring stuff. The first thing is we just have to find out what it is. We do want to have a brief discussion on what's the difference between native ODBC and Event One Office Connector, because this is the question we get quite a bit in our seminars. We're going to show you how to set up the ODBC DSN on your machine, and this basically will set up the pipeline that you can use to share data. And then a little section I like to call hunting for Easter eggs, which is now that we have the ability to extract the data, we've got to find out where it is, what tables it is, what fields it is, how do I go find out the information that I need. So this will be the first part of what we're going to do. What we're then going to do is we're going to do some class examples, and I've picked about a half a dozen small ones just to sort of that I thought would kind of demonstrate some of the powerful things that you can do. I do have some access, maybe a little heavier access examples. Given our profile, we may roll off to that and roll more into Excel. We'll just see how the results come back. And then depending on we have enough time, typically when we do a beginning ODBC seminar, it's typically about an 8-hour course. And what we normally do in the 8-hour course is we spend maybe about 6 hours of it teaching basics, and then we do 2 hours of really fun advanced stuff. In this case, we're not ever going to be able to get to all the stuff that's in the advanced stuff, but I do want to show you some examples at the end just to kind of show you where you can kind of go with the concepts that I'm going to be showing you. Okay. So that is basically how I have things organized. Do we have any questions or anything so far? Okay. So
no questions so far.
Okay. So let's move on just very quickly now. So what the heck is ODBC? Well, ODBC is an acronym, and it stands for Open Database Connectivity. And it's a very old standard. It is basically a methodology that allows programs to access information from a database independent of the database management system, which is just basically a fancy way of saying it's a way of getting programs to talk to each other. And how it works is it inserts a driver program between the programs, one of which is requesting data and the other which has it. So as an example, you can see right now, I have a diagram that shows I have Microsoft Excel over on the left, and we want to get some data out of the Sage 300 database program. And so basically this driver sits between the two programs, and it's used to basically link that data and retrieve it into Microsoft Excel. Okay. In order for it to work, both programs have to be ODBC compliant. Now, years ago, this was a bigger issue because not all databases or a majority of them were. But what you're going to find out, ODBC is a very old standard. It was actually originally started, I believe, in 1992. And so most, if not all, databases that I run into these days are ODBC compliant. And so as long as the programs have ODBC capabilities in them, you can hopefully get them to talk to each other. One confusion that we get with ODBC is people think that it's an import and it's an export. And it is not an import-export. The big key difference and what makes ODBC so powerful is it creates a refreshable link between the database and the application that is requesting the data. And because of that, once we set that link up, once we set that pipeline up, all we have to do is refresh it, and it will refresh the data in the requesting program. One of the reasons it's so powerful. I did make the comment earlier, it's an old standard. It's been around for quite a while. So drivers are typically available, and I'm going to show you when we do the setup. You'll see there's a whole bunch of drivers that are actually loaded on your Windows system that come with Windows. So most database vendors have them. There are some that don't. There are some that protect their backend databases to an extreme degree. Intuit is one of them, as an example. But for the most part, we typically find that we can find drivers for just about everything. If they either ship with the program or we can locate them. Now with Sage 300, Sage 300 actually comes with two different sets of drivers. There is the one that we're going to be working on, which is the Sage 300 CRE ODBC driver, which I believe is made by Simba. And it is the driver that we use to access accounting data, property management data, and estimating data. And that's the one that we're going to be dealing with in all of our examples. There is a second driver that comes with Sage that is the pervasive ODBC driver. And that is used to access purchasing, inventory, and service management. It's a separate driver, okay? So there are two different drivers. They are set up in two different ways. Most people that I have run into only use the Sage 300 ODBC driver. We actually use both. As an example, one of the things that we do is our estimating database, which is in the Sage CRE ODBC driver. We have items in there that are also present in our purchasing database. So let's say a light fixture or a 2x4 stud. And what we want to be able to do is occasionally we want to be able to look to see that the standard cost that we have in our estimating database actually reflect what the world we're actually buying stuff for and purchasing. And so it's a way we actually have to set up two different drivers, and we have to merge the data together. In this case, we actually do it in Access, and we merge them together. And that way I have both two drivers feeding into the same database. So just be aware of there are two different methodologies depending upon what data you want to look at, okay? As far as the Sage 300 CRE driver is concerned, currently Sage tests it only with Microsoft Office. So Access, Excel, and Word. We are not going to be doing any Word examples, by the way, in today's webinar, which is kind of a shame because actually you can do really great mail merges and contract paperwork using ODBC. But just be aware, it's pretty much the entire Office suite we can access using the Sage 300 driver. Now, if you are somebody that uses some alternative software other than Microsoft Office, I personally have not tested it yet with G Suite at all. When I first started teaching this years ago, we had a lot of people that used either WordPerfect for their word processing or used Paradox or a similar database. I have actually found it works fairly well with non-tested products. But that being said and done, you will not get any support out of Sage on that. They will only support the driver in regards to Microsoft Office, at least the last times that I checked with them. Yeah. So the other thing to know about ODBC, and this is a very important distinction, is with the Sage 300 CRE ODBC driver, generally it is a read-only driver. Okay, so you see the diagram below, you see that we have the Sage 300 database, which has all the goodies that we want to get to. And we have this DSN, this driver that we're going to be using to extract that. Now, if you look with Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Word on the side, you'll see that the arrow is one direction. When we are extracting data and we are using data in Excel and in Word, it is a one-way street. We can read the data, we cannot alter the data back in the original database. However, there are two programs, Microsoft Query and Microsoft Access, that the arrow is both ways. And what that tells me is if we have the correct rights to do it, and the program is structured that we can either create or modify a field, we can not only read data, but we can also modify it back in the original database. Now, I will say after I did this diagram is actually a little bit inaccurate. Microsoft Access does not actually go through Query to do the database. Both Query and Access go straight to the DSN, but the concept is the same. We have two programs that can read and write, and we have two that can read only. The other thing, some final points to point out, when it comes to writebacks, which we just talked about, writebacks can be used to either update or create a specific field. So as an example, in job costs, we have a project manager field in the job in the job record. And we're going to see in just a few minutes that it's an ODBC replaceable field, which means that I can actually update it and not even be inside the Sage program. In addition, you can also use this feature to create records in certain tables. So as an example, in the jobs table, we not only can modify job information, certain fields, we can actually create entirely new jobs without being inside the program. Now, as an example, our company, we do a lot of different real estate stuff, but we do residential development. And so when we start a brand new residential development, very often I have to load, 60 or 100 different related jobs into Sage for that particular phase of the development. And we do that all by putting them in an Excel spreadsheet and just pushing them all into the system. We don't actually sit there and type them all. So certain records, we are allowed to actually create brand new records. Okay. What you generally cannot do with a writeback is, number one, you can't write to a transaction file. And there are certain transactions that they have to go through the native Sage system, because when they get posted, they update many buckets and they do a lot of things in the background, and you just couldn't update the fields because things would be out of balance. The other thing that you can't do is you can't delete records. So you can't use ODBC, at least in the native driver, you can't delete records, you can only create them. Okay. And then finally, be aware that Sage ODBC does recognize and respect the Sage 300 CRE security. So one of the things that you have to be careful about with ODBC is we're basically creating a pipeline back into the database. And we want to make sure that just because we're giving someone a pipeline, we want to make sure they can't see something or they can't do something that they're not allowed to do elsewhere in the system. So as an example, if I have somebody who is not allowed to have access to payroll records, they can't use this to go into the database and see the payroll records. It's going to look at their login credentials and it's going to say, you don't have the right to see this. I'm not going to let you see the data or link to it. In addition, part of the security definition is you can also restrict people to read only, not to read and write. And that is very important, because what we're going to see is the write-back functions are very powerful. We want to be very careful who we give that access right to. Okay. And then a final question we get a lot of, the Sage 300 CRE driver works with 32-bit Office. Now, unless something has changed since last year, I believe this is still the case. We are starting to see now people that have 64-bit Office. The Sage driver is not optimized. Actually, I don't believe it works with 64-bit. You have to use the 32-bit version of it. So I don't know if we have a whole lot of 64-bit Office users, but the Sage driver only works with the 32-bit version of Office. So let me do this is kind of a little breaking point. Let me compare a little bit about what we've talked to Office Connector, and then we'll take some questions. So let's talk about, if we can, the difference between ODBC and Event One Office Connector. So I'm assuming most people, if they're Sage 300 users, at least know of Event One Office Connector. It's a great little program. It's an Excel add-on, and it's basically used to bring stuff over in from not only bring it over, but also it can creatively write stuff back into the Sage database. So I get a lot of questions on what's the difference between the two. Well, number one, both are tools for extracting and manipulating data. They both basically do the same job. And I can personally say I've yet to run into anything that I can do in ODBC that I can't do in Office Connector. However, just because I can do it doesn't mean I should. Office Connector, there's a lot of tasks we're going to talk about in just a second that it does do far better than just native ODBC. Native ODBC predates the introduction of Office Connector. So we have a lot of users out there, especially like I say in the Sage users group. We have a lot of people that are ODBC, that use ODBC that don't use Office Connector, myself included, just because we had already been using ODBC before Office Connector was ever used. So we have kind of a large installed base. If it's working, we don't mess with it. The one thing to be aware of, Office Connector in itself is more limited in scope than general native ODBC. It's basically an Excel add-in, and it's for use with Sage data in Microsoft Excel. Now they are constantly enhancing that, but as an example, last time I chatted with Mike over at Event One, they do not interface with Access. They were working on a Microsoft Word interface, but I haven't seen anything on that. I don't know whether that is actually out there or not. But Office Connector is basically an Excel tool. It's used for Excel only. There's a separate product they have called Liberty Reports that's much more agnostic that you can use with multiple applications. But Office Connector itself is basically an Excel product. Now, there are some things that Office Connector is especially powerful for. The first one, I'm going to give you a couple examples of where I would really consider using it in your toolbox. The first is if you have a Sage install and you have lots and lots of data folders. And I'm not talking about one or two. We see people that have 40 or 50 data folders. Typically, those are like contract project managements or joint venture people. Office Connector allows you to switch from one data folder to the other on the fly, and it's a very powerful thing. With native ODBC, we have to set up a separate pipeline for each folder, and it's far more clunky to do. So if you've got lots of multiple data folders, Office Connector is definitely the way you want to go. The other is if you are we have fewer and fewer property management people, it seems, these years, but if you work with property management has a lot of tables in it. Leases, tenants leases, properties, etc. You can link them all together in ODBC. However, for doing something like a lease abstract, it's far easier to do it in something like Office Connector than it is with the native ODBC. Okay, so generally, if you're heavy into property management, Office Connector, I think, is a slightly more efficient choice. If you need to write data back into Sage 300 from Excel, now we mentioned before that in native ODBC, right now I can only write back in basically in Access and in Query. Event One does have an API that allows it to write back into Excel, and one of the really powerful ones they have, and we're going to talk about it in the seminar this afternoon, is it does allow you to write back into the miscellaneous worksheets function for month-end WIP. I don't know a lot of people that are using it right now, but they're the only ones that can do that. So depending on if you have to write data back and you want to do it from Excel, Office Connector is your alternative for that. This is the really powerful one. And the really powerful one is financial statement backdating. Now, I'm going to show you some financial statement examples at the end of the course. Unfortunately, we're not going to have enough time that we can build them. But one of the really strong things we do with ODBC is we produce all of our financial reports, our financial statements, our financial recaps, little vignettes, anything that we need financial data. We use those in Excel, and we use ODBC to produce them versus using Financial Statement Designer. It's a far more versatile tool. One of the challenges you run into is that you want to backdate your financials. And it used to be, we actually had a class on doing this. It was an 8-hour class on how to backdate them. And it involved a little bit of trickery in Excel. Event One now has a financial statement function package, and it's great. It does the backdating, and it does the backdating superbly. So if you are ever going to use ODBC for financial reporting, and I highly recommend you do, that is an absolute godsend, their backdating functions. They do two things. They do what are called backdating, which is getting you the right period, and they also do rollbacks, which is a very, very, very powerful thing, or I'm sorry, roll-ups, which is combining accounts into single line items. The other one for advanced users is there's actually a SQL editor that is built inside to Office Connector, and if you have to fine tune the SQL statements, it's far better than the one that's sitting in Microsoft Query. Okay. What I have normally found, even though I personally don't use Office Connector, as I said, it's a great program. I know Mike and James very well. Heck, they send me a Christmas wreath every year, and it's a really good program. What I found very often is I get people that are hybrid users. Specifically, I find a lot of hybrid use with financial statements. The backdating function in the financial statements is really powerful. I still like to roll all the accounts up using traditional ODBC. If we have some time, maybe I could show you that at the end of this seminar, but you can use both of them at the same time. They're not exclusive. So that to the extent of it is kind of the boring stuff, sort of a big overview. So before we, I understand we're kind of going through stuff fast because we do have some limited time, but let me take a moment here and see, do we have any questions or any clarifications that anybody would like?
So far, we don't have any questions.
Okay, well, that means I'm either doing really well or people are falling asleep. So off we go. So what we're going to do, hopefully we're going to get out of this Outlook so I can start actually showing you some fun stuff. But now let's get a little bit into the meat of it. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to set up an ODBC DSN. And this is the first thing that we need to do so that we can start using the data. The nice thing about this is we only have to do it generally once. Okay, so a DSN is a data source name, and think of it, it's just a pipeline, and it's basically going to point to a specific Sage data folder. Okay. Now, when we set them up, it points to one and only one data folder. So as a result, if you have more than one data folder, you're going to set up more than one DSN. You're going to have one set up for each data folder. You can combine them later on into queries. So as an example, if you have two different companies and they're in different data folders and you want to combine them all into one financial statement, we could still do that, but they each have to be a separate DSN. Okay. So I'm going to walk you through the basic steps on screen here. We're going to actually go do it, and then we'll come back and review. So what we're going to do is we're going to launch Windows ODBC data sources, the 32-bit version, which I will show you. We're going to indicate what type of DSN we're going to set up, and there are three: a user, a system, or a file. We're going to select the Timberline data driver, which is the piece of software that we'll be using to talk to the Sage database. We're going to have to tell it some naming conventions, how we want the table names to appear when we use them in the application that's requesting data. And we have to actually point it to a specific Sage data folder. Okay, and then we have to set some auxiliary options, some naming conventions, maximum table size, which we will talk about. Okay. Now, the example that I'm going to go through right now is the one that you use on the standard pervasive database. As most of you are aware of, there is now a replicated database that also is available in Sage. Personally, I don't know a whole lot of people that are using it, but there are people out there that are. Realize that the replicated database, there is a separate setup if you want to actually use the data that is in the replicated database. That uses a different setup, and it uses a 64-bit driver. Okay. So the one that we're talking about is just the plain vanilla old standard pervasive database. So with that being said and done, let's see, I've got to figure out how to go back, and I think, oh, actually, there you go. Okay. So hopefully everybody can see my desktop right now, my rather messy desktop of my computer. So the first thing that we're going to do on a setup is we're going to go down here into the search box, and we're going to type for Windows ODBC. Actually, let's just go to ODBC, I'm sorry. ODBC. And you're going to see that one of the matches that comes up is this thing that says ODBC data sources 32-bit. Now you'll notice there's also one for 64-bit that also comes up. That's not the one that we want to use. As I mentioned earlier, the ODBC data source for Sage is optimized for 32-bit. So this is the one we're going to select. And we're going to get this window. Okay. Now you'll notice that on this window we have a couple tabs. We have what's called a user DSN, we have a system DSN, and we have a file DSN. And we could actually add under either tab. So what's the difference between those? Well, the user DSN, which is normally the one that we are going to set up, the data source can be used by the current window user on the current computer. So basically it's tied into your Windows logon, okay? And that's the most common one. So if I set up under the user DSN, I'm going to be able to see it. But if somebody else uses my computer and they log in using different window credentials, they will not see it. So it is tied to my window login. If I set it up under the system DSN, the system DSN is linked to the current computer, but it's not linked to the current user. So if I set it up here, you can use, anybody who uses my computer will be able to use that DSN. Okay. Now, keep in mind, just because they can use it doesn't mean Sage's security is not going to prevent them from using it. They will just see it. They will have access to it. And then file DSNs are global. The data source can basically be shared by all users as long as they have the same driver. Okay. And I rarely see that. So I can tell you in 99.9% of the situations, you're going to be setting up under the default user DSN. This is going to be tied into you and your login. Okay. So to do one, I'm going to click add, and this is going to come up, and it's going to say, I'm going to create a new data source. What I want you to do is I want you to select the driver that we're going to use. Now, I mentioned earlier that ODBC has been around and there are tons of ODBC drivers. And what you see in this list, these are all the drivers that actually ship with Microsoft, okay? So we have a driver that we could talk to Sybase, DBase, Excel, Paradox, Access, Visual Fox, just a ton of them. Salesforce, these all come with the system. Now, when you installed, if you go all the way to the bottom, when Timberline or Sage was installed on your system, all the way on the bottom here, you're going to see one called Timberline Data. And that is the Sage driver that was actually loaded on your machine when you installed Sage. So it should be there. So we're going to click that, and we're going to click Finish. And then this box comes up. And what we're going to do in this box is, first off, we're going to give our data source a name. and try to be descriptive on it. Let me get this little box out of the way. Try to be descriptive on it. So in this case, I'm going to call mine TL. We're going to use the construction sample data. Construction sample data. Okay. You can give it any name you want. The next thing we have to do is we have to say, what kind of database are you looking at? The two options you have, am I looking at accounting data or am I looking at estimating data? In this case, we're going to be doing accounting data. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to select the data folder that we want to work with. Okay. And when I click that, you get the same dialog box that you see when you originally start Sage. So the exact same box. In this case, I'm going to use the construction sample data. So I'm going to collect that. And we click OK. Okay. And then the final thing is, if I click on this little thing that says options, it's going to have some options that I can use. And the options tend to confuse people, especially the first one. Okay. So I have 3 different options when it comes to field and field naming. And what this means is data inside of Sage is stored in tables. They call them records, but they're actually tables. And tables have multiple names so that when you are looking at that data, you could actually get data out of the table using different names. There's a standard name, there's a custom name, there's a dictionary name. There's also, I believe, an internal name, which you can't see here. So what's the difference between them? Well, as an example, if I were to collect standard description here, let's say that I have a company and we call our jobs jobs, which most people do. When we do system setup, we also, if you've ever been involved in the system setup, you have the ability to customize the names on fields. So as an example, let's say in job cost, some people call their extras, they call them phases, they don't call them extras. What you can do is you can set up your system so that whenever anybody sees an extra in your system, it's called a phase. It's not called an extra. And it will populate that way through your whole system. If you use ODBC and you go to look at the table and you want it to use your custom name, then you would select custom descriptions. And when you see it, it will show that field using its custom name. If, however, you want to always see it just using the standard name in the system, you would collect standard descriptions. So I'll give you another example. Let's assume that we have a customer table, and instead of customers, we call them lackeys or easy marks or something like that. Once again, if I want to see lackeys, when I go to extract the data, I would use custom descriptions, and the table would be lackeys. Standard descriptions, it would be customers. Now, where this gets a little bit important is if you are combining files from multiple data folders. Sometimes if you've custom named fields in different data folders and you've named them different things, then you have to be careful how you name your ODBC query. So as an example, if I write a ODBC worksheet to look at my customer data, and I go move that to another folder so that I can look at customers in another data folder. But in that data folder, I don't call my customers customers, I call them lackeys. It won't work because we'll go looking for the customer table and we'll say I can't find it. So standard descriptions, while they don't necessarily match everything that's in your system, they're more interchangeable because a customer will always be a customer and an extra will always be an extra. Custom descriptions are a little more friendly to deal with on a daily basis, just because you'll always see the terminology that you're used to using. So I could tell you as an example, I use custom descriptions for the stuff that we use in-house. The stuff that I generally write when I teach, so like for the Sage Users Group, I typically use standard descriptions so that I can share the templates with people, because then I can share it regardless of what their description is. Okay. There are, on this one, we actually are going to use custom descriptions because that's how I have the course material written. There are also two other options here. One is use maximum table segment size, and one is shorten field and table names. The use maximum table segment size is that there are some data folders or there are some tables in the system that are enormous. The big one being job. Job is a huge table, and it's so large that some ODBC programs can't see it all if it's one table. So what happens is if you keep that unchecked, which you should generally, ODBC will break the table up into pieces. It'll make a job 1 and a job 2 table so that your program can read it. So this is one that you typically would not check unless you had a reason for it. The shortened table field and table names is only used if you have reports, if you're an old-time user and you have reports that are in Sage version 8 or prior. So typically, the defaults on these are typically custom description, and these two are unchecked. And for the most part, that is perfectly fine. You just leave them as they are. So if I now click OK, you'll now see that if I scroll down my list, I have a construction sample data. And actually I have two on here, one I spelled right, one I spelled wrong. Okay, but I have now set one up, and that is now my pipeline to go into the construction sample data. I'm going to delete this one. Now, remember how I said, if I have more than one data folder and I want to get data from more than one data folder, I have to set up a separate DSN to get there. So in this case, I do have a couple examples that use the PM sample data. So once again, all I've got to do is I've got to go to add, go all the way to the bottom of the list, say Timberline data, finished. And I can set up a separate one and say TL PM sample data. Whoops. It's going to be accounting data. I want to get this data, instead of getting it from construction, I want to get it from the Gold Coast group, which is the sample data. And I'm just going to use, as we just discussed, I'm just going to use my basic options, custom, unchecked. And I now have a separate one. I have one for construction. I have one for sample. Okay. So I've set two different ones. I have two different pipelines I've just set up on this machine. Okay. So if I switch very quickly back here, there we go. If I go back to my, oops. If I go back here, I'm not overly good. The only time I ever do this stuff is when I have to, PowerPoint is when I have to do these online. Okay, so we talked a little about the steps that we just went through. So this is a recap of what we just talked about. So the three different types of DSNs, a user, a system, and a file. Okay. And then these were a little bit about how the naming conventions worked. Standard descriptions, custom descriptions. We didn't talk about dictionary names. Dictionary names is an internal name, and it's used by the programs to communicate amongst themselves. You would never use it, or I've never run anybody that's used it. It's really for internal use only. We would use either standard or custom. Okay. Okay, does anybody have any questions? As I said, this is kind of the boring stuff, and I do apologize for it, but we do have to know how to do this stuff. Any questions so far?
There are no questions so far.
Okay. So very quickly, because we've got just about 10 minutes before lunch. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to go look for some Easter eggs. So one of the things that I said, we're about ready to start using this, but one of the questions we run into, and you're going to run into it whether you go to, you're going to run into it whether you use report writer, or you're going to use ODBC, or you're going to use anything, we have to know where's the data. Okay, so for any reporting purpose, we have to know what tables contain the data. We want to know how the data tables relate to each other. And it would be good to know what we can do with the data. Can we just read it? Can we write it? Can we create a new record? Okay. So there are three tools that we have available that we can use, regardless of whether we're using ODBC, Report Design, Crystal, etc. The first of which we're going to take a look of is in Report Designer, the available tools field. Event 1 actually makes something called a quick aim manual, which is actually a manual set. It's very nice, that basically discusses every table inside of Sage 300, what it does, how the data is stored, what the possible values are. So actually, if you're a really heavy duty person, it's a great asset. And then the other thing which we may be able to get into just a little is creating an access table database. But for the first part, what we're going to do, I'm going to dive out of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to desktop here, and we're going to go to Report Designer. And some of you may have seen this before, but if you're a Report Designer, if you go to Tools, there is an option called Available Fields. Okay? And when I go to Available Fields as an example, let's go down, we'll take a very simple record. We're going to take vendor. Okay? If I hit print preview, it will tell me a whole bunch of stuff about the vendor table. It will tell me that these are my fields. I have a vendor, name, address. If it's a type field, it'll tell me what the options are, whether it's a number, whether a list. It tells me a whole bunch of information. Then all the way at the bottom, it will generally tell me how the table is sorted. So in this case, the standard way it's sorted is by vendor code. There's a secondary sort by vendor name. Okay. Now, one of the interesting things you'll notice when I have this particular box that I click to see that, there's a box here that says include information for ODBC reporting. I'm going to click that box and I'm going to run that report again. And you're going to see that it comes back, but it comes back with a little more information. The first thing is that it's now added these two columns, or it added a column that says replaceable. And you're going to see that I have some fields that have X's in them. What that X means is that I can actually manipulate, update, or change that field outside of Sage. I can actually do it. In my case, I can do it in Access or I can do it in Query. I don't have to be in the program to update it. Okay. Now you will notice that not all fields, a lot of them in the vendors are, but you'll notice that there are a lot of them that are not, as example here. So my year-to-date amount is not replaceable. And that's logical. Anything that's basically being driven by a transaction, you don't want to be able to change that outside the system because it would throw you out of balance. So by turning on that option, it basically tells us which fields we can manipulate outside of the program and which ones we can't. So one of the things I used to do when I first started out is I printed a whole bunch of these out and put them in a binder, and it was my way of figuring out what I can do in the system and what I couldn't. Now, one of the other things, and I'm going to have to get, I have this little bar next to me that's driving me nuts with the, I don't know if you can see it. You'll notice the other thing that it added to the top here is it added this little thing on the top. It says APM record number 9, ODBC creatable. So what that tells me is not only can I update certain vendor information from ODBC, if I wanted to, I could actually add brand new vendors and not even be inside the system. I could do it straight from Access. I could do it straight from Query. Okay. So not only can I modify existing records, I can create new ones. Okay. So this is normally in ODBC, this is our starting place. If we have to go figure out where data is, this is where we figure it out. Okay. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. So we've got like 6 minutes left. before the break. And let's do this. What we're going to do is we will start one quick example in Excel. I'm hoping now we're pretty much done with everything I'm going to show you in Outlook. What we're going to do for the rest of the class is now we're going to start the fun stuff, which I actually get to show you what we can do with all of this stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a very quick example, okay? And this is just an example about how we can use ODBC to answer a very basic question. And that is, your boss comes to us and he says, you know, Mike, times are tough. What I'd like to know is I'd like to know who we spend money with, because quite honestly, if we're spending a lot of money with them, you know, I'd like to go maybe see if we can negotiate some better terms. Okay. So what I just did here is I opened up. So what we want to do is we want to go quickly look at our vendors and see who the heck we're buying from. Okay. So I just opened up a blank Excel workbook. And what I'm going to do, we're going to save this, our exercises. I'm just going to go to a blank sheet. And what I'm going to do is we're going to get some vendor data. So how do we do the ODBC link? Well, in Excel, we do the link by going to data up here. Over on the side, there will be a button under the Get and Transform Data saying Get Data. We're going to click that. And we're going to go down here where it says From Other Sources. And you're going to see it's going to give us a list. Okay, now here's one of the first mistakes beginners make is they said, hey, this Savecki guy is teaching us about ODBC. I see something down here that says I can get data from ODBC. Let's go there. Actually, that's not where you go. Okay, it will not work. What we want to do, we are using ODBC, but we're using a program called Microsoft Query is the gateway that's being used to do the query through ODBC. So when we're in Excel, we're always going to Microsoft Query. We're not going to ODBC. That's the nomenclature. Yeah. So when I click that button, it's going to show me the same sort of a list that we saw when we set up the original data source. And if I scroll down here, and you have to excuse me, I have a ton of them on my system because we use this a lot. These are all databases we use. You're going to go down and you're going to see that one that we set up. Timberline construction sample data. And I'm sorry that I have two of them here. I have one that's misspelled down here, you can see. My apologies, that's why it's there. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that it's listed twice. There will be a not shareable version, and there's one that doesn't have anything with it. By default, you want to use the one that's not shareable, okay? It's been a topic of a lot of discussion in the users groups over the years, but that's the one you want to use. Okay. And for this example, there's this little box down here that says use the query wizard. Okay. I'm going to click OK. Now, once again, ODBC respects security inside of Sage. So it's not going to let me get into the data folder until it can figure out what I've got access right to. So I'm going to have to say that I have access rights to get inside that folder. Okay. Okay. And so now it's going to say, go and show me what data you want to bring back. And so in this case, I'm going to scroll down quite a ways and I'm going to find the vendor table. And this is typically the hardest part about learning is just finding out what the tables are. That's my vendor table, my master vendor table. And I'm going to bring back, if I double click, I want to bring back the vendor code, the vendor name, okay. I want to bring back the year-to-date amount, okay. And I want to bring back the last year's amount. I want to see what we spent this year with somebody and what we spent last year with somebody. Yeah, that's the four pieces of information that I want to bring back. I'm going to say next. The next thing it's going to ask is, do you want to bring back everybody or do you only want to bring back certain people? Now, in this case, let's bring everybody back. The next thing it's going to ask us is, do you want to sort it? If it's typically the way you want to sort it. Otherwise, what I'll do is I'll just send it back to you however it's sorted in the table. In this case, that's fine. We're going to sort it ourselves when we get to Excel. Next. And then the next thing it's going to ask is, do you just want to bring the data back into Excel, or do you have to do some more work on this query? And in this example, we don't really need to do anything more. We're just going to bring it right back into Excel. I'm going to click Finish. And it's now going to ask me, what do you want to put the data? Well, I could say it's gonna, right now I'm over in C3, that's perfectly fine. I'm gonna click OK. And it now has brought that data over into Excel. Now, a couple things. First off, it brought the data over, but keep in mind that this is now a table. This is now an Excel table. You'll notice I'm clicking out here. When I click on this data, you'll notice it up here in the ribbon, design comes out. This is a table in Excel now, and this is linked back into, this is an active link back into Sage 300. So as a result, if I got all of my data in this table and I deleted it, which I just did, it doesn't make a difference because all I've got to do is go back here, I go up the data and hit refresh, and it all comes back. And when it comes back, it also all comes back using the most recent data. Okay. So because it's in an Excel table, then I could also do some very quick things on it. The first thing I can do, and give me 1 minute here and then we'll be out. I see we're out of time. I'm just going to right format these, and I'm going to say format these as currency, just because I want it to look good. I'm showing this to the boss. But the other thing I can do then is I can just say, okay, I'm going to click on the top here and say, sort this by largest to smallest. And there you have it. Those are my vendors that I spend the most money with. Those are the guys I need to go have my talk about. Okay. And because this is a live link, all I've got to do now is just save this to my desktop or wherever I want to save it to. And we will pick it up when we come back. We'll call this ODBC book. And now whenever I want, I can go and rerun this, and it will always give me the latest vendor information sorted by year-to-date purchases. Okay. So that's probably a good stopping point right there. Actually, it is the stopping point. So any quick questions before we break?
Yes. Oh dear. Well, it's not really a question, I'm afraid. She just said when I tried to open it in Excel, my database didn't show up.
Okay, if they want to shoot me some info, I can, if they want to work during lunch, I'm going to be sitting here. I'm fat enough, trust me. So if someone wants me to work with them, I could actually show them an example. We could actually work on it over the break here. Okay. Other than that, I guess we'll see everybody back here at what are we back here at 1 CST?
Yep, 1 o'clock
Okay.
Central. And thank you, everybody, and everybody have a good lunch.
Okay.
Right. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.